Hi there, welcome to British Car Ranch. Today we're going to take you on a little trip. We're going to let you peek in on us while we do a test on a brand new rebuild engine. We've got some equipment here that is specialized, and I kind of thought you might like to see what it's all about. So we'll move over here. This happens to be a 4-cylinder Austin Healey engine. Belongs to Bob Withicombe and goes in his BN1 Austin Healey. It's had a complete engine rebuild, and after 60 plus years, every single part, whether it's moving or stationary, gets refurbished during our engine rebuild. So it's a new engine. And before we put that engine into a car, we want to make sure and have the confidence that everything is turning out exactly the way we want it to before it's in the car, so we don't have to pull it back out. Many of these cars have a very difficult entry-exit into the car for the engine, so let's do it once and have it right. So what we've got here is a custom engine sled that we have built, and it has the provision for the radiator that goes with the engine that is being tested. We've got a cooling system with the fan. We've got, on this side over here, we've got the starter solenoid, the coil, and this stays on the rig. We've got an ignition switch. If we move back around this way, we've got a set of gauges that we can watch what the oil pressure and temperature and voltage is doing on the engine. We have a remote fuel source. We have an electric fuel pump to deliver it. We've got a remote battery. We've got an exhaust system. So when we fire this little baby up, it's going to be noisy, so you may want to turn the volume down once we get started. We have a throttle control system here that we can adapt to TR6, Austin Healey, or MG. So we can change the speed of the engine as it's being tested. We've got a drip pan down below, and we're set up with a PCV system here. And this exits down out of the way here, so we can run the carburetors, run the engine. We want to make sure that the engine starts instantly when we put the ignition to it. We don't want to be grinding on it like they do in the movies or in some of these restoration shows. It drives me crazy to watch them grind and grind and grind on a brand new engine, and it's just sitting there eating itself up. So I want an instant start. So what we do to make sure that happens is we'll go through the entire distributor, of course. We'll set up the static timing. We'll set up the point gap. We'll make sure that the plugs have continuity with the distributor. We'll come over to the fuel side, and we'll make sure that we've got the fuel pump is delivering 2 to 3 pounds of pressure to the carburetors. We'll look down in the well and do what I call the puff test to make sure the fuel is at the jet, ready to be sucked into the engine. We'll have the cooling system filled with 50-50 mix for protection. And we've got our cooling system ready to turn on when we're ready. All of this is designed so that we can fire it off and immediately go up to 1800 RPMs. That's our minimum. The first 2 minutes of an engine's running are the most critical. That's when the camshaft and the pistons and the other moving parts are bedding in and getting their protection from the ZDDP that we add in the engine oil. So what do we use, you might add? We'll walk over this way. The last step that we do before we start the engine is pressurize, lubricate the lubrication system. We do that with a pressure pot. This will take 1 quart of oil, and this fitting on top will take an air fitting like you're going to air up your tires. Pressurize this system, pull the trigger, it routes through this fitting, and that will be attached to the side of the engine where the oil pressure gauge goes on the car. Once we pull the trigger and have this loaded up, it's going to shoot 40 pounds of oil into the system and lubricate it just as if the oil pump was pumping and creating lubrication everywhere. So every part gets lubricated before we turn it over. We use, for our startup, a 30-weight Valvoline non-detergent oil. In the startup phase, you don't want detergents or any other additives getting in the way of parts bedding in and breaking in together. So that has no ZDTP in it. So we have to add an appropriate amount to that mix so we have our camshaft protection. And it just happens to be, for this 7-quart system, we're going to add 8 ounces of ZDDP for our initial break-in. It lowers as we change oil and get into the regular running of the engine, but for startup we want a nice 2,500 parts per million dosage to go to the camshaft. So we will, when we start this baby up, the things that we're watching for, first of all, we'll listen and see if there's any unusual noises that shouldn't be there. The next thing is we'll go over and check the oil pressure and make sure that we've got the appropriate oil pressure for what we're running. The third thing is we'll start taking the temperature off of the thermostat housing and the back of the head to make sure that the cooling system is circulating and keeping the engine at the proper temperature. We're going to check the RPMs, and we'll come over here and look at some of the tools that we're going to be using. And during the engine startup, the non-contact thermometer will tell us what the surface temperature is running. The non-contact photo tachometer will tell us what RPMs the engine is turning. The Unison carburetor synchronizer will tell us if we've got even flow through the carburetors. We've got a timer so we can test how long we're running. We like to run them 3 separate times for 30 minutes apiece, and that's important for the break-in period. All of these parts are learning to live together in those 3 30-minute sessions, and we want that to happen while we're here on the sled and have control over everything. If something needs to be adjusted or changed, we can do it very easily while it's exposed here on the sled. And unfortunately, new parts do fail. We've seen that enough to know that we want to test all of the new parts we put in outside where we can get to them if we need to. Then the other thing we'll do is we'll check the timing as we're running in. We have the static timing checked. We're going to do the dynamic timing while it's running with the timing light. And just in case you haven't seen a timing light like this, this is the only timing light you want to buy. Don't waste your money on anything else. This is the Innova 5568, and it works every time the right way. I have tried probably 20 different ones. That's the one that works. Okay, so we do have some starting fluid available for a nice rich mixture on a first startup. Today's temperature is nice and warm. I'm not sure we'll need it today. And that's a rundown of what we use while we're checking things out. So we're ready to go. As I mentioned, you may want to turn the volume down once we start it up. It's a live exhaust with no muffler, and we'll be using hand signals, and hopefully this is the signal that we're going to see instead of this signal. So, ready, set, fan on. Timer started. I've already pre-lubricated the engine oiling system, so it's ready to go. I know the cooling system and everything else is ready, so I'm just ready to hook up the battery. Turn on the ignition. I've got my red light that tells me the fuel pump is working. And here we go. That was awesome. Now, I'm not surprised, but I'm very pleased. This was a flawless startup and first 30-minute run. It's smooth, it takes acceleration nicely, it decelerates, there's no noises, it runs nice and smooth. I love it. It's just going to be a terrific engine. So, what's next? Well, after this first 30-minute run, we're going to drain the oil right away and get rid of it, because all of the friction and bedding in has created some particles in that oil. I want to get rid of that, even though we've got a Wix filter on there, and start with fresh oil. So the second batch of oil is going to have a little bit less. It's got 6 ounces of ZDDP in it for the next part of the break-in. Then I will run it 2 more times on that same oil, and I'm varying the RPMs from 1900 to 2600. I don't leave it at one place. I go ahead and get it variable. And then after that third one, I'm going to leave the oil in there and take the engine out of the sled and put it into the car, get it hooked up and ready to run, and then for its first live road test break-in, it will have that same 30-weight non-detergent ZDDP in it, and I will drive it probably 10 miles, and I'll be very conservative with it. I know there's a lot of different opinions on how you should break it in. Here's mine. You take it easy. Everything is learning to live together. I don't go over 2,700 RPMs. I vary the speeds and conditions constantly so that it is getting a chance to break in evenly. I'll come back to the shop then and drain that oil, and now I can put my 2050 Collector's Choice that has the proper amount of ZDDP in it for daily driving. Now remember, the difference is we have a lot more ZDDP in the break-in than we do in the normal driving, so that's the difference. So after you run it about 500 miles after that point, then you can change the oil again and check the torque on the cylinder head nuts, check the valve adjustment on it, check the timing, check the dwell, check all of those variables again to make sure they haven't slipped a little bit, and then begin driving it gradually more aggressively as you gain confidence in the new engine. So I hope you found that interesting. We sure do. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and email us, britishcarranch@hotmail.com, and thanks a bunch.